Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an amazing, really, list of virtually the entire orchestral repertoire, symphonies and tone poems and other things that you can get entirely from conductors who were not the most famous conductors of their day. And this was something that one of you suggested. It was a wonderful suggestion. You said, listen, the major labels, everybody pushes these big name conductors, but sometimes the best performances come from conductors who were not the biggest, the most highly promoted, the best, whatever that means. And even if they didn't make tons of great records, they made a few. And some of those few are as great as anything anybody else did, and they might as well be reference recordings of the works in question, and that's often true. And this actually came up in connection with the Joseph Kripp's recordings, because of his great Schubert Ninth and his great Mozart with the Concertgebouw and some other things that he did that were marvelous, even though not everything he did was equally fabulous, and even though he didn't get the attention that some of the other major conductors got. But there have always been like stables of these people bopping around and getting recorded, and some of the recordings they made were marvelous. And so the suggestion was that I do a list of great performances by those conductors, the ones whose names were not Karajan and Bernstein and Schulte and Toscanini and Furtwängler and those folks, or Haitink or Ozawa, you know who all the big name guys were, right? I mean, we all know who they were. But the truth of the matter is there are fabulous performances by others, and those performances are so numerous that you really can put together an entire collection of the basic orchestral repertoire in symphonies and other things without ever coming up with one of those major names. And so I've done it. We have 20 sets. And, and instead of doing individual performances, I decided to, go a little crazy. I did symphony cycles, tone poem cycles, collections of orchestral music, all the major elements of the basic repertoire from the classical period to the 20th century. And my God, what a list it turned up. I mean, if you get this list, you will have an absolutely fabulous collection of orchestral works. I mean, it's a whole like basic collection of everything. You beginners, here it is. Here's the list. I'm kind of impressed by how it came out. Wonderful suggestion. Thank you for making it. Let's just run down the list. Most of these actually I have talked about in other videos. They've been reviewed at ClassicsToday.com. And there's nothing controversial, I think, about any of this. It's all just fantastic. So we begin with Beethoven, of course. Beethoven's symphony cycles. This is one that the original viewer mentioned. Hans Schmidt-Isserstedt, his Beethoven cycle with the Vienna Philharmonic. It's a wonderful Beethoven cycle. Absolutely marvelous. In fact, it's so marvelous that it was out of print for many, many years, except in Japan for some reason. It's first rate. It's actually the best Beethoven cycle that the Vienna Philharmonic ever made, probably. It's on Decca. It's now in the first Hans Schmidt-Isserstedt box that Decca Eloquence re-released, and we've talked about it. And of course, people have been panting and drooling and screeching and begging to have it re-released, and now it's out there. So there you are. So that's where we start. Next, Schumann Symphonies 1 through 4, and the Overture, Scherzo, and Finale in this case, with Wolfgang Sawallisch and the Staatskapelle Dresden. He's another guy that got mentioned. Sawallisch's Schumann is legendary as the greatest ever Schumann cycle. I mean, is it? What do you say? There are many great Schumann cycles, but it's as great as anybody. And you'll notice with some of these that orchestras keep popping up, notably the Staatskapelle Dresden, which is really, in my view, the great German orchestra of the 20th century. The problem is that it was locked behind the Iron Curtain for most of the 20th century, and so we didn't really get to know it the way we should. But that maybe preserved its special character in a way. It never had a crazy conductor like Herbert von Karajan imposing his will on the players. And so it's the orchestra itself that gets to shine. And it has a wonderful, wonderful transparency of texture and individuality of timbre in the various orchestral sections. It's just a great orchestra. I'd take them over Berlin any day. I really would. I mean, compare this Schumann cycle to Karajan's Schumann cycle. Oh, what a difference. It's kind of amazing. So Schumann is there. And then we have, let's see, do the Prokofiev Symphonies 1 through 7 with the Royal Scottish National Orchestra under Neeme Järvi on Chandos. Hands down, it's the best Prokofiev cycle out there. There is, however, a wonderful bit of competition, and it's from a similarly lesser-known guy, and that's the Theodore Kuchar cycle from Ukraine on Naxos, which is marvelous as well. But Neeme Järvi is, of course, the king of interesting or a little bit off-the-beaten-path repertoire. He does it marvelously. He did tons and tons of it. He was the go-to conductor for everything that was not one of the major German composers, for Bis, for Deutsche Grammophon, for Chandos, and he made scads of fabulous recordings of stuff that otherwise never got the kind of attention it deserved, or certainly hadn't sounded as exciting as it does under his hands. So the Prokofiev Symphonies, well, amazing. Now let's look at the Nielsen Symphonies. This is actually one of the most interesting in this list because it's so unexpected, but it just goes to show what a great conductor, not necessarily a famous conductor, can do with an orchestra that you may not know at all. I mean, in this case, we have Theodore Kuchar with the Janácek Philharmonic Orchestra, which is, nobody's idea of one of the world's great orchestras, but they're a scrappy bunch. And Nielsen Symphonies live on raw energy and dynamism, and that's exactly what they get in this cycle on Brilliant Classics. It's amazingly good and amazingly much better than a lot of the Nielsen cycles by much more famous conductors. Of course, there's also the other best Nielsen cycle, or one of the best Nielsen cycles out there by Sakari Oramo with I think it's Swedish, the Swedish whatever, something on Bis. And they're also marvelous, and they're also not that well known. And so, again, there you go. I mean, it's really kind of remarkable, although Nielsen cycles sort of proliferate on the fringes of the repertoire. I mean, all the Danish ones are with conductors who aren't your biggest name conductors, Michael Schoenwandt and people like that. So yeah, I mean, Nielsen's quite lucky when it comes to the lesser known artist, in the lesser known artist department, and orchestras too. But this one really, really was a shocker that it was so good. And it's very inexpensive. And I mean, what's not to love? So after Nielsen, we have Rachmaninoff Symphonies 1 through 3, of course, with Leonard, Slatkin, and St. Louis on Vox. I mean, at the time these were recorded, Slatkin was new. The St. Louis Symphony was nothing anyone cared about. Vox was a budget label that nobody cared about. And they did marvelous Rachmaninoff. They did all the orchestral works. And concertos, and with Abby Simon. I mean, they were just terrific, and they still are. They've all been reissued by Naxos and remastered sound, and they're still terrific. Slatkin, of course, remade his Rachmaninoff cycle in Detroit, also for Naxos, and it's superb. Also, Slatkin is, of course, one of those conductors. He's had many positions with orchestras, and he's a really long and distinguished career, but he was never known for his, Beethoven, Brahms type stuff. He did Russian music, contemporary music, American music, French music, all of it very well. For the most part, amazing English music, Elgar and Vaughan Williams, you can do it all. You really can, but he never had the cachet because he seemed to work under the radar a little bit, or with second-tier orchestras, even though they were first-tier as long as he was there, for the most part. A remarkable conductor, and he's still out there going strong, but his first Rachmaninoff cycle was definitely one of the delights of the catalog for those of us who couldn't afford full-price releases with the big-name artists, and we were just as well off as we would have been otherwise. So yes, he's on the list. Schubert, Symphonies 1 through 9. Again, the Staatskapelle Dresden, that amazing go-to orchestra for anything German, in this case under Herbert Blomstedt, who had yet to become a grand old man. He was a grand young man in those days, and he was working in East Germany, which prevented most of us from hearing a lot of his work. But he did some beautiful, beautiful recordings in Dresden, a Beethoven cycle that was excellent, and this Schubert cycle, which is just splendid, as good as anything out there, with that amazing, amazing orchestra at his fingertips. Beautiful, effortless music making. Absolutely gorgeous. And that's on Berlin Classics and various other licensed things, labels and things you can find. So after Schubert, of course, the Haydn symphonies, and you know what this is. It's Antal Dorati in the Philharmonia Hungarica. It's the reference Haydn cycle. Has been for decades. Dorati was an incredible conductor. He did everything, but he was also a second-tier conductor. He was on the Mercury label. He wasn't on the big labels until much later in his career when he got Decca. But he was also known for doing all kinds of interesting repertoire and unusual things that other people wouldn't touch. His reputation was dogged by the fact that he was initially a ballet conductor, which of course is like, oh no, God. He didn't grow up in some, choir loft as a, boy chorister at St. Thomas's in Leipzig singing Bach cantatas his whole life. I mean, he did music. It's really a lot more enjoyable. Well, that's me. But he was a fabulous conductor, as we all know, and did tons of great recordings. He made as many great recordings as anybody ever did. But he wasn't a name that everybody thinks of immediately when you talk about the great 20th century conductors. It's a pity, because he did the greatest ever Haydn cycle with an orchestra of Hungarian expatriates who decamped after the 1956, communist revolution and Russian invasion and all that stuff that was going on there. And wow, what a great legacy that's turned out to be, that he went on and did Haydn operas and all kinds of other stuff. It's wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. So Mendelssohn is next. Symphonies 1 through 5. The Bergen Philharmonic under Andrew Litton. Another fantastic conductor. I mean, his Mahler in Dallas was as good as anybody's. He did also wonderful Russian music. Remember, for Virgin, when they first came out, his Rachmaninoff symphonies and things, and he's redone a lot of that stuff too for the BIS label. And his Mendelssohn symphonies are delightful, lively and energetic and unpretentious and fresh and just beautiful, beautiful performances, splendidly recorded. So let's not forget that. And that gets you the Mendelssohn cycle. I mean, see how this is working? It's like amazing. Martinu, Symphonies 1 through 6. Martinu has become, I think, a major composer now. I think we can safely say he's there. He's kind of arrived. He doesn't get played live as much as he deserves to, but he's so well represented on recordings now. And his symphony cycle with the National Symphony Orchestra of Ukraine under Arthur Fagin on Naxos is absolutely first class. And it's so much better than like all of those Czech people are doing. It really is. I mean, Václav Neumann tried it. Bela Hlavek did a good one, but not in Czechoslovakia, of all interesting things. There are individual fine performances with the Czech Philharmonic of various symphonies, but for symphony cycles, you've got Bryden Thompson with the Scottish National, who I easily could have mentioned as well. And you have this one on Naxos with Arthur Fagin. Then you've got the Bela Hlavek with the BBC Symphony. It's really a very interesting situation with Martinu's symphonies. None of them were written in the Czech Republic, as it turns out. I mean, they were late works that were mostly written on commission for American orchestras, actually, which goes to show that perhaps he is an international symphonist. That's what the discography seems to reveal. So, and no big name conductors other than Charles Munch played him back in the day, back when he was still around, and afterwards. So Sawallisch does Martinu's Fourth. That's one of his things. But basically, you have to go to the lesser-known artists to get a really great Martinu cycle, because those are the people who are playing the music. And fortunately, they're doing it in world-class standards. So that Naxos cycle is really not one to miss. It's terrific. And they also have all the piano concertos, by the way. So after Martinu, Sibelius, Symphonies 1 through 7 in Kullervo, a classic set. Paavo Berglund with the Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, his first Sibelius cycle. and the best in many respects. It has both the elegance for which he later became known, as well as the edge, the raw intensity, and the romantic ardor in the earlier symphonies. It's a wonderful cycle, and it had the premiere of the Kullervo Symphony, which is fabulous. So that's a must-get, actually, if you're a Sibelius person. And one of the nifty things about that particular cycle is that neither Bournemouth nor Bergland were at all well known at that time. You know, Bergland got the go-ahead because he was Finnish. Fortunately, he was good in Finnish and really good. And he did a really fine Sibelius, and he made 3 Sibelius cycles. But this is still the best one, and done at a time when neither of them were well known. They were local talents, and, well, there you go. Just goes to show. Shostakovich Symphonies with the WDR Symphony Orchestra under Rudolf Barshai. This came out as a box, all the symphonies, all at once, and it shocked everyone to death. Barshai knew Shostakovich. He was associated with the composer. He made those arrangements of the string quartets, his chamber symphonies. He knows the idiom as well as anybody. He's a very elegant and refined conductor, which you might think makes him a little bit unsuited for Shostakovich's more, expressionist, gripping, horror-laden works. But no, he knows the idiom. He knows it very, very, very well and plays it very well. There are some things in this cycle that are absolutely astonishing, including the most doom-laden performance of the 13th Symphony, Babi Yar, that you will ever hear in your life. It's astonishingly great. He was involved in the premiere of the 14th Symphony. He was a Shostakovichian to the manner born, and this is an absolutely splendid cycle. Really first rate on brilliant classics, inexpensive, and just sensational. So that covers Shostakovich. And then we do Bruckner. Okay, so Bruckner, well, the go-to guy, as was mentioned by the original poster, was Günter Wand, who was regarded, quite rightly, as a nobody for most of his career until he became a grand old man and started doing, what I consider my favorite Beethoven cycle. Actually, it's amazing, mostly working with the NDR Symphony Orchestra, which sounds marvelous, and Cologne Radio. He did all the Bruckner symphonies with Cologne Radio extremely well, and then started remaking them from number 4 on, over and 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 over. I know, just bazillions of them. Some with the Berlin Philharmonic, most with the NDR Symphony Orchestra, and those are the ones to get if you feel like it. But Günter Wand also did a fabulous Schubert symphony cycle. His Schubert Ninth, too, was also one of the really great ones. He was reliable in just about everything he did. He had a wonderful Brahms cycle. Amazing. Just amazing. And fortunately, RCA just set up the microphones and recorded him wherever he turned up. Did he have to do so many recordings of the Bruckner Ninth? Well, no, he didn't. But that's okay. If they're all good, it doesn't really matter, does it? Because you just grab one. So Günter Wand is one of those guys, one of those lesser-known artists who popped into somewhat fame discographically at the end of his life, but who really was a wonderful artist all along and made beautiful recordings. So then we have, let's see, what else? Oh, my goodness, Richard Strauss, Tone Poems and Orchestral Works. You know what this one's going to be, of course. It's the Staatskapelle Dresden, naturally, that great Strauss orchestra under Rudolf Kempe. Kempe was the Strauss guy. He really was. He was more an opera conductor probably than anything else. He had a major post in Munich for a while, but generally speaking, his recordings sort of fell by the wayside, except for his Strauss, which is legendary. And I've talked about it so many times, and we all know it. So, it's a classic case of a conductor who was not known for being the biggest, most important thing out there doing great work. Kempe did a lot of great work. He was really a splendid conductor. So we did Strauss. Then Mahler. Of course, we have to do Mahler. Symphonies 1 through 10, plus Das Lied von der Erde with Gary Bertini. I just wrote Gary Bertini. I didn't even write down the orchestra. It was Cologne Radio, I believe. And oh my goodness, what a fantastic box. It is the best, most consistent Mahler cycle out there. It really was. It really is. It's out of print. It's hard to find. It's ridiculous. It ought to be released and available forever. He was just a terrific conductor. I mean, he understood the idiom, and he has this orchestra that sounds marvelous, and the sonics are incredible, and the eighth is amazing. Recorded live in Tokyo. It's just thrillingly exciting. Boy, is that a great Mahler cycle. It's such a shock. And then you say, oh, well, you have to get Gary Bertini. And people look at you and they go, who? Gary who? Gary what? First-class conductor, particularly in this repertoire. Absolutely amazing. And if it's a one-off, it's a great one-off. It really is. It's just shockingly marvelous. Dvorak, Symphonies 1 through 9. Ottmar Sweetener with the Staatskapelle Berlin, not Dresden, Berlin. Sweetener was another one of those German Kapellmeister guys. This is the Kapellmeister's Revenge. That's the topic of this particular series of talks. And Sweetener's Dvorak is luminous and delicious and beautifully recorded, except for that horribly creaking chair in the Fourth Symphony. It creaks and creaks and creaks, but that's okay. The rest of it is just first class. It's a first-class Dvorak cycle. And you wouldn't expect it. I mean, where's it coming from? They're not Czech. Oh, they're German. Well, so what? If it's great, it's great. And Sweetener also did fabulous Mozart, one of the greatest ever Rites of Spring with the Staatskapelle Dresden. There's a lot out there. He was a very, very fine conductor, but quiet conductor who had his nice little career in East Germany, and that was it. So we have Dvorak, Tchaikovsky, Symphonies 1 through 6, the London Symphony, and Igor Markevich. Of course, Markevich was just, one of the most amazing personalities of the entire 20th century. Other than the Lamoureux Orchestra for like a very brief period, he didn't have any major posts for any length of time. He was just a musical genius who sort of flitted around dropping great recordings wherever he went. And his Tchaikovsky cycle is one of the reference Tchaikovsky cycles, maybe the reference Tchaikovsky cycle. It was originally issued on Philips, and it was originally ignored by everybody because, he was a famous guy. I mean, he was such a powerful musical presence that you couldn't ignore him. I mean, you couldn't ignore his recordings at all. I mean, he had an authority that was amazing, but there were all these other famous people doing the same stuff. When you have Karajan doing Tchaikovsky cycles and Bernstein's Tchaikovsky cycle, and everyone was doing them. And then we had Ormandy in the U.S., whose Tchaikovsky was famous. And then you have this, Markevich guy with the London Symphony, and right? Fabulous. Ignore it at your peril. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. And then Mozart, the complete symphonies with the ultimate Kapellmeister, Charles Mackerras, and the Prague Chamber Orchestra on Telarc. Oh, Charles Mackerras, the guy who never made a bad record. He also never took a position with an orchestra for any length of time. He did opera stuff. He's known for jump-starting the early music movement with his research into early music performance techniques, and also he discovered Janácek for the rest of the universe outside of Czechoslovakia. And he was amazing. He was just amazing. An incredible conductor. And he made recordings also. He was like Markevich. He just made recordings for every label with every orchestra. No matter what he did, it turned out wonderfully for the most part. He could do anything from Stravinsky to Walton to Mahler to Handel to Mozart. It just blows your mind what that guy could achieve and did achieve. And he's not the most famous guy out there. He should be. I mean, a lot of these people deserve to be a lot more famous than they are. I mean, they really do. But, yes, so you can get the complete Mozart symphonies by lesser known people who are not necessarily the ones that got all the promotion and acclaim in their lifetimes, and you'll be better off, absolutely better off. So you've got the whole Mozarts, all the Vaughan Williams symphonies with the Royal Liverpool Orchestra under Vernon Handley. Now, I could just as easily have gone with Slatkin with the Vaughan Williams symphonies, which are fabulous, but I think the Vern, his nickname was Todd for some reason, Todd Handley. I think he deserves a little bit of credit too, because he sort of took up where Adrian Bolt left off and pursued a career almost entirely based on doing unusual or neglected English repertoire. And there's so much of it, and so much of it is fabulous. And his Vaughan Williams cycle is absolutely first class, delightful. I have some issues with some of the sonics in like the Fifth Symphony and some things, but it's basically excellent. There are some amazing performances in there. The disc that has the London Symphony number 8 is just stunning. He has the violence necessary to bring home numbers 4 and 6. His Antarctica is wonderfully creepy. His Pastoral Symphony is beautiful. It's just lovely, lovely music making, and a cycle that deserves plenty of attention. It's gotten some from EMI. It's in the big Vaughan Williams box and things like that, which is good. It's really good. He did wonderful, wonderful work on behalf of English music and deserves credit for that at least. And then let's see, who else have we got? Debussy and Ravel, both together, the complete orchestral works. Well, you know this, with Jean Martinon and different French orchestras. Oh my goodness, Martinon is an amazing conductor. He did get Chicago for a few years, and then he returned to France and spent the rest of his life recording. He was the Vernon Handley of France, recording all the major French 20th century orchestral repertoire phenomenally. And his Debussy and Ravel boxes, I mean, they've been issued separately and together and in every possible, kind of formation. They've been famous from day one, and they are amazing, fantastic. I mean, his La Mer is unbeatable. I mean, his Ravel Mother Goose with the harps at the end is glorious. There's just one fabulous performance after another. Just reference recordings. There they are, with a conductor who just never had much cachet because, again, he didn't do the German standards on disc anyway, and he only had a brief amount of international fame in Chicago, which didn't go well. And even though he made great recordings there, as Nielsen Fourth, and then, Zverez and Bartok, and he was a contemporary composer primarily, and he had that composer's ear for clarity and all that stuff that just worked out fabulously in French repertoire. So if you get his Debussy and Ravel, you are set for Debussy and Ravel, both of them. And finally, number 20. Well, we started with the 3 Bs, or one of them, Beethoven. We're going to end with Brahms, the Brahms Symphony cycle with Kurt Sanderling, because we're talking about Kapellmeisters, and boy, was he a Kapellmeister. What is a Kapellmeister? Well, originally a Kapellmeister was a musician who was in charge of a courtly performing arts ensemble or group. The Kapelle was the group of musicians that was attached to an aristocratic court. And the guy who ran it was the Kapellmeister. Bach was a Kapellmeister when he was in Cothen. He was the Kapellmeister to Prince Augustus Gloop, or whatever his name was. And so we have Kapellmeisters. Nowadays, it's used as a term of disrepute. It means a workaday, ordinary, uninteresting, sort of cranky, stiff, rigid German something or other. That's what a Kapellmeister is today. But that's not really fair. I mean, these are superbly well-trained musicians, and Kurt Sanderling spent most of his life, again, behind the Iron Curtain, so he wasn't known as well as perhaps he could have. He certainly had an affinity for the German repertoire, but he could be on or he could be off. He did an absolutely rotten Beethoven cycle in London. It was just as stiff and Kapellmeisterish in the bad sense as you could possibly imagine. And he made 2 Brahms cycles, one of which was fabulous with the Staatskapelle Dresden, and one of which was much less fabulous with it was the Berlin Symphony, I think, or something like that. Both of them were on Brilliant Classics. Well, no, this one, the Staatskapelle Dresden one, was on Eurodisc, which is owned by RCA, and who knows where it is now. I mean, it really ought to be released. It's one of the great Brahms cycles. You've all said so. Whenever we talk about Brahms cycles, you say, don't forget Sanderling. It's great. Yes, it is great. It is great, but it was always very hard to find, and it still is. But maybe it's available streaming or something like that. But remember, it's the one with the Staatskapelle Dresden, not the other one, which was, of course, more readily available on Berlin Classics or one of those labels. So there you have it, my friends. 20 lesser-known conductors doing, if not the best, then equal to the best versions of the entire standard orchestral repertoire. from the classical period through the death of Shostakovich. Pretty amazing, huh? Really, it is. It's just incredible. And like I said, you get this list, you've got a record collection. You're in business. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and thank you so much for making this suggestion. It was tons of fun to do. Take care.